Our guest is Dr. James S. Robbins. He's Senior Fellow in National Security Affairs at the American Foreign Policy Council. He is the author, his latest book, of Native Americans, Patriotism, Exceptionalism, and the New American Identity, and a member of USA Today's Board of Contributors. Article last week speaking to what was ahead and what we've learned about the Ukraine, Dr. James S. Robbins wrote. And Jim, welcome back. How are you?
Hey, Crane, how you doing?
I'm doing well. There's a lot of stuff being thrown our way in the sense of commentary and strong commentary, strong statements being made. And then there are the likes of Matt Lauer saying in cut number 2, if we could have that. And this is where I want to welcome you into everything. Matt Lauer said this to Joe Scarborough of Morning Joe, former Republican congressman. Roll it.
We're 6 days into this crisis now. The rhetoric seems to be heating up, not between Russia and the United States, but between Republicans in Congress and the administration. You heard John McCain saying it was a massive intelligence failure and a misreading of Vladimir Putin's intentions. Lindsey Graham weighed in saying what we're seeing in the Ukraine right now is a result of failed policies in Syria and Benghazi. Do you agree with those assessments?
No, absolutely not.
Why are we seeing what we're seeing? If this reminds us a little bit of the Cold War, Joe, back during the Cold War, there was a theory, maybe even an unwritten rule, that politics ended at the water's edge.
Right.
Why is that no longer the case?
Well,
all right. Now, with the commentaries, with what you know, Jim, and everything, I first want to start here. Is it appropriate for people to be criticizing the president at a time where, as Matt Lauer, Lauer Power himself of the Today Show, says, hey, there was a time, Cold War, we didn't do that. Your thoughts?
Was there really that time? I mean, it seems to me kind of a myth. I mean, during when? During Vietnam? Is that when we're saying there was no criticism of the president? I'm thinking of Democrats criticizing President Nixon in particular. Is that the mythical time we're talking about? Was it when people were criticizing Jimmy Carter's policies? Was it when they were Democrats were seeking to impeach Ronald Reagan for his policies in Central America? I mean, when exactly was this time when you couldn't criticize the president? I think that's more of a myth than a reality.
Well, I mean, the Democrats, I remember President Bush, and they were very respectful to him. It wasn't like they were going around saying the war is lost or accusing him of lying our way into a war with the very same statements that they had made. Jim?
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, maybe back in the Eisenhower administration, there was some deference to the commander-in-chief who was, you know, in his previous incarnation a four-star general who had a pretty good foreign policy team, and we were faced with dire threats. So maybe back then there wasn't a lot of criticism, but I think ever since then, that's all we've seen has been criticism of the executive. You know, for good or ill, I think some of it's been valid, some of it hasn't, but just to say that politics ends at the water's edge, well, that's a really nice theory, but the reality is that when you have a president screwing up, that people in the opposition party are going to call him out on that. And, you know, it's kind of valid, really. I mean, when you look at the current administration, what a bad foreign policy record they have, then maybe they need some criticism. I mean, look at Benghazi, for example. That, you know, geez.
Yeah, well, no, that's my point. I think sometimes in these conversations, all of a sudden we're here, and it reminds me actually of what President Bush mentioned during, it might have been 2006 or his last press conference where he goes, you remember what happened after 9/11? Everybody was pointing fingers saying, why didn't you do something? Then we do something, everybody's going, why are you doing that? It's the idea that all of a sudden we get to this particular place and we have no context to it. There's a lead-in that would certainly tell us and speak to that we have been weak and we've invited aggression and going against what Eisenhower originally laid out with peace through strength. Your thoughts on that, Jim? Do you think President Obama's behavior foreign policy wise, whether it be Benghazi, whether it be Syria Pink Line, whether it's 2009 and the Iranian people rising up and him saying he's not going to meddle. Tell me, did he invite Putin's aggression in your estimation?
Oh yeah, I'm sure of that. There's been nothing in Mr. Obama's foreign policy that has shown strength. I mean, you could say, yeah, what about him killing bin Laden? Well, sure, that was a surgical strike. It was a long planned thing. It used a very small number of forces and so forth. I mean, that was a good call, but that is not his foreign policy. That was just a thing that happened. When you look at the broader strokes of it, how Iran is totally not intimidated by him, how North Korea does whatever it wants with respect to him, how Russia is now behaving, for example. Pakistan, they haven't really been our friends. Saudi Arabia, our former ally, as it were, I mean, so disgusted with Mr. Obama's behavior with respect to Syria that they've broken our relationship. I mean, not completely, but they've publicly stated that they're drawing back from the United States because the president was just such a feeble actor when it came to Syria. So, yeah, it's been going on the entire time. You mentioned not backing up the Iranian people when they rose up in 2009. The whole Benghazi travesty, of first not knowing that our guys are going to get attacked, then not backing them up when they were attacked, and then coming up with this YouTube video nonsense afterwards to cover up their own failures. Just a whole litany of things, even things that are important to the president, like his very first venture out onto the stage in foreign policy. And people may forget this, but it was right in the first few months of his election when the International Olympic Committee was going to decide on one of the future Olympics. I forget which one it was, but he was trying to get it for Chicago. And he went there and failed. They said, no, we're not going to give it to Chicago. Then he went out on try to negotiate an international global warming treaty. This was in December of '09, and thought that he could rally all of these countries to come up with some action on climate change, and he failed there. In fact, the BRIC countries, or Brazil and India and China and Russia, got together in a secret meeting. I mean, it was so humiliating for our president, and he was trying to get on the phone with the Chinese premier, and they were like, "Oh, he's not here right now. Oh, he's at the airport." And then finally, Mr. Obama walked into a room where they were having this meeting, and everybody was very embarrassed. But it just goes to show how this guy has never, from day one, been a respected actor on the world stage. No one takes him seriously, and so Vladimir Putin moving into Crimea and taking it over. Well, what's the big surprise? It's a done deal. It's a fait accompli. He's going to pay no price for it, and who knows how much more of Ukraine he's going to gobble up.
Well, I think that's the question. And you citing history in your article, Hungary in 1956, Czechoslovakia in 1968, 1979, Afghanistan. These are the arguments being used. This is what they do. They come in. But nobody really knows where Putin's desire for hegemony ends. I mean, what does he see? Because as you mentioned in your article, it was the greatest, what was it? He thinks the breakup of the Soviet Union.
Catastrophe.
Yeah, and so we listen to him, Jim, and understand obviously there are themes and similarities between the arguments being used and Adolf Hitler. I know Hillary Clinton backed away from that, but she backs away from pretty much everything at some point or another. We really don't know where she stands on things. That said, what do you think Vladimir Putin's manifest destiny is when it comes to the reconstitution of the Soviet Union? Or is it that?
I think it's to put together as much as he can. When you look at the 15 republics that made up the Soviet Union, of course, one was Russia, so he's already got that. They have a presence in the former Republic of Georgia. They have troops in there right now. Now they have a piece of Ukraine. They helped. There was another one in Tajikistan, one of the smaller ones, but they helped overthrow that government. Who knows? But, I mean, the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, countries with a long history and, you know, their own nationality and so forth, they should be nervous right now. We should be helping back them up. We should be giving them support, because when the tanks start rolling, those are countries that get run over.
What kind of support? Sorry to interrupt, my friend, but what kind of support?
Whatever we can. I mean, diplomatic support. I mean, they're already those countries are already in NATO, so it would be difficult for Putin to try anything with them, because if you attack a NATO country, then the treaty comes into force, and then there's a war. On the other hand, from Mr. Putin's point of view, he might say, I wonder if all the NATO countries would really rise in defense of the Baltic states, you know, and just test it out. Maybe he'll give it a little try. I don't know. But in any case, whatever former Soviet republics we can back up, we should. And not just them, but countries like Poland and Hungary, any country on the periphery, you know, just to somehow make a pledge, like, we will take action if you guys are messed with, if they try anything like that with you. Now, Ukraine is not a member of NATO, although they really want to be a member of NATO, and for good reason. So maybe just Vladimir Putin saw the way it was going, because NATO was going to be or Ukraine was going to be fast-tracked into NATO membership, and maybe he just figured, hey, I got to get this done now before that country becomes part of NATO and is part of a collective security agreement. So I don't know. If I were in Kiev right now and the government of Ukraine, I'd be asking for Americans to send in everything they could send in to help that country out, or at least extend, like, you know, an air umbrella or a nuclear umbrella, or I don't know what, but some kind of guarantee. That's the kind of thing that if Barack Obama really has spine, he would just draw a red line, right? We've seen how that works. But he could do it. He could say, look, if you take territorial aggression against Ukraine, then you're going to have a problem with us. We're going to come after you. But he'll never do that. So he'll talk about economic sanctions and all that. That kind of stuff is really a joke.
Oh, okay, but and this is what gets me, because I see a guy who's, in a way, behaved it's been described as a gangster-like government, with Rahm Emanuel being his, you know, chief lieutenant, quite frankly. And I see that, and I know, and you know what I'm thinking of right now, Jim, is the left taking that clip and trying to make it racial, which is just ridiculous. It's absolutely asinine that would enter my thought, only because it's the reactionary. But here's my point. He knows how to get tough with coal. He knows how to get tough with oil. He knows how to get tough with groups that are advocating for freedom, free markets, or protection of Israel, or life. He knows how to get tough. He knows how to use government agencies to do that. So I guess my question is, does he not believe in the greatness of America and what we've done, certainly in the latter half or the last century, and what it took to win the Cold War? Does he just not have that sense? And do we look at the first couple speeches you mentioned in 2009, the speech in Cairo, as well as the speech in France, regarding his worldview on America's place in the world?
Yeah, if he wanted to get tough with Putin, maybe he could stick the IRS on them. Maybe that would work.
You know what I mean, though? He has that. I mean, he definitely has a fire in his belly. You mentioned people that, you know, I mean, he certainly talks tough when it comes to certain things and attempts to follow through. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I don't think that we should expect that somebody coming from his milieu, I mean, Barack Obama, who came of age in the 1980s on the left when leftists were denouncing America. I mean, this is back during the Reagan era. And I remember being in grad school and having debates with these guys. So they just, you know, they hated America. They thought that America was the evil empire, not the Soviet Union, that America was on the verge of collapse, that, you know, deficits and these other things are going to drive us into the ground, that we had no right to have our nuclear arsenal or our presence in the world. And, that, you know, again, they're sort of coming off the echo of the Vietnam critique that our foreign adventures were immoral and unwinnable. He comes from that environment. So why would we expect that he believes in American exceptionalism or America's special place in the world or anything else. There's nothing from his background and nothing from that intellectual background that he springs from that tells us that. So why would he suddenly think that? I see no reason to believe that. I think that he is totally a product of his intellectual underpinnings and where he came from in that respect, which does not think that America is exceptional. As he said back in his first year, that America is, Americans think they're exceptional, but other countries think they're exceptional too, right?
Yeah,
I mean, yeah,
total
everybody
misunderstanding.
thinks they're exceptional.
Yeah, no understanding of that. Tell me, Poland, Czech Republic, give them back the missile shield we promised them under Bush?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, right away.
Do it in a speech, make a speech about it, because that's a part of this, isn't it? Making it public, saying, hey, here's what we're going to do, and announcing that to Putin. Some would say that would be, hey, that's trying to brinksmanship, you're bringing it up, saber-rattling. But it seems to me that a lot of people oppose President Reagan calling the Soviet Union an evil empire, but it worked.
Yeah, absolutely. So, get the missile defenses back in those countries. Get the pull out of the START II nuclear arms agreement. Yeah, do something real. The notion that we're going to freeze some bank accounts or something like that, this isn't going to convince anybody in Russia. They don't care about things like that. They can hit us back. What if they start cutting energy supplies to Western Europe? What if they do have tools at their disposal to hurt us and to hurt our allies. What if they start doing things like that? That's going to be a problem. So make it strategic. Do things that Russia can't stop us from doing, and that they really don't want us to do. And that's an example right there.
Okay, final question. You've gone overtime with us, and we appreciate it, Jim, as always. It's been a while, and love you, brother. But could you answer this question? I've been still trying to figure out, where was President Obama the night of the Benghazi attack? Where did he go?
Well, that's a good question. As we've said before, there are things that still need to be revealed. And actually, since I've been on, there have been some of those things revealed, such as the fact that his senior advisors and his national security advisor and the Secretary of Defense were all informed of this while it was going on. And in fact, the combatant commanders, including the commander of Central Command and Africa Command, were all in Washington having a meeting when the Benghazi attacks went down. And the notion that they were not informed immediately is wrong. The idea that the Secretary of Defense was not part of the decision-making as it was happening is wrong, because they were informed immediately by the White House what was going on.
Dr. G.
By people who actually walked into the room of the meeting and said, this is attack going down. So where the president was, that's a really good question. Maybe we'll get clarity on that. They've given us several different answers. So perhaps the truth will come out through more hearings and more investigations.
Well, Dr. James S. Robbins, Senior Fellow, National Security Affairs at the American Foreign Policy Council and author of Native Americans, Patriotism, Exceptionalism, and the New American Identity, and member of USA Today's Board of Contributors. You just found out why. Thank you so much. Great to be with you, Jim. Thank you. Crane Durham.